Hello and welcome to the final session in the exception handling module. In this video, we'll explore some of the best practices in exception handling. Some of these practices we have already covered in our videos in this module. I'll repeat them here for the sake of completeness. To walk you through the best practices, I've built a simplified version of a workflow you are already familiar with. In this simple workflow, I merely read what is there in an Excel file and output them using these output data table activities and these write lines that you see here. As you might guess by now, I'm going to mess with this workflow and cause it to fail. This is the exception handling module after all. Let's say I delete the input file for this process. As you can see, I have configured a throw in my workflow to handle this error. Let's see how it executes. There you go. My process informs me that a file was not found and that the process aborted due to an unexpected error. However, if this were a process that is live in production, the log messages here aren't of much help to me. The message says file not found, but which file does it refer to? This message below that an unexpected error has occurred doesn't give me any new information. Also, whom should I notify when this exception message occurs? A good exception message works like a journalist. When a particular incident occurs, it gives us all the important information about it. Let us address these through some good programming practices. The first best practice here is to always raise exceptions with the correct exception type, application versus business rule exception. I've mentioned this point quite often so far. But why is it necessary to make this distinction? In most cases, a process has two owners. A technical owner, such as a developer. The technical owner is responsible for fixing any application exceptions that occur in the process. The second type of owner is the business owner, an expert who knows this process well from the business side. All business rule exceptions need to be addressed to business owners of a process. As you can see here, I have raised this exception with the generic new exception command. Although this is clearly a business rule exception, I'm going to go ahead and first correct that. So if this error occurs, I'm going to contact the business owner. Let us now run this process again and see what happens now after this correction. We see that despite raising a new type of exception, a business rule exception that is, there is no observable change in my workflow. My log messages are still the same as before. It is still not clear whom I need to address this error to. This is where the second best practice comes into play, using a specific catch type. In this case, I'll change my catch type to the business rule exception type. I'll need to add that here, for which I'll need to browse for a business rule exception. I can now log this exception as a business rule exception with a prompt that contacts the process's business owner. Similarly, I can add a prompt to contact the technical owner in case of application exceptions. So when I now run the process, I know whom I have to contact. All right, so now my workflow has told me whom to reach out to, but what do I tell him or her? My exception message doesn't have any detail other than that some file in this process wasn't found. The third best practice is to perform good logging, to specify clear exception messages in the first place and log them along with their source activity in our catch block. Firstly, I'm going to rename our throw activity to throw input file not found. We'll get to why it is important to rename our activities in a little bit. Secondly, I'm going to write down the exception message as weather report input file not found. This makes it clear which input file I'm referring to here. Coming back to my log message, I'm going to append the exception message itself in my catch block after separating it with a new line character. You can see here that I've already appended the exception message as well as the exception source and separated them by new line characters. I'm going to do the same thing in the exception block for my application exceptions. When I now run this process, it's crystal clear to me what the problem is. I can also immediately notify the business owner to restore the input file to the correct location. Once the input file has been restored, let us run this workflow once again. Okay, this time we have encountered an application exception. That is why the application exception catch has been invoked with the unexpected error message. Also, it tells me that I need to contact the technical owner. By reading the logs, I realized that the process could not find a particular file, and the culprit is a read range activity. Therefore, I open this nested workflow and scroll down to notice that I have two read range activities. Which of the two has the problem? In this case, it's easy for me to notice that one of them doesn't have the full path required here. So I can go ahead and update that. However, it's always a good practice to append your activity names with specific information that helps you identify them. So I'll rename this read range to call it website URL, and this one to say cities. A good practice here is to retain the UiPath name for the activity and append something else to it to make it unique. So I retained the read range part, which comes from UiPath, and I appended it with the term website URL or cities. So far, we've looked at 4 best practices when it comes to exception handling. Let me now point out 2 common bad practices that I've seen developers use while handling exceptions. The first one is to leave a catch block empty. Let us say that a particular activity in a code often causes problems and throws errors. I have seen developers surround this activity with a try catch and leave the catch block empty. For instance, when I now run this code, the website URL activity gives me an error. What a bad practice would be to surround this try catch, go to the exception, and leave it completely empty. Now this code would still function. It gets to the end. But the problem is this part of the code has not been executed, and we have no feedback in the form of an error or a warning message that it hasn't been executed. You can write this down as a commandment. Thou shalt not leave a catch block empty. Another bad practice that I've seen developers resort to is to use a try catch as a proxy for decision stages. Let me demonstrate that with an example. Let us say we have a process where the input file can be found in one of 2 folders, input folder 1 or input folder 2. Right now, this activity looks for the file in input folder 1. Now this fails. Here, what I have seen developers do is to surround this with a try catch and look in input folder 2 in the catch stage. This might work, but do not do this. When I look at this workflow as a developer, I don't even understand that it has to either look in input folder 1 or input folder 2. So the code is not very clear to me. The correct way to actually implement this is in the workflow that you see here. First, I check if the file exists in folder 1. If not, I check if it exists in folder 2. And if it's not found in either of these folders, I raise an exception using this throw here. To recap, here are some of the best practices that you must follow while handling exceptions. Using the correct exception type, that is, application and business rule exceptions and handling them differently. Using a specific type of catch to handle your exceptions wherever possible. Writing clear exception messages and logging them, both their message as well as their source. Renaming all activities by appending their standard UiPath names with more specific information. And here are 2 practices that you must avoid: leaving a catch block empty or using a try catch instead of a decision stage. The quiz that follows at the end of this video will put your learning to the test. This brings us to the end of the exception handling module, where you have learned several crucial concepts to strengthen your workflows. Hope you enjoy applying them. Good luck and bye for now.